I think that each generation cares deeply about the next generation, maybe the next two generations. They care about the world. We do all kinds of things, and we make sacrifices for future generations. My parents' generation made enormous sacrifices for my generation, for example, in fighting World War II. Arguably, the United States didn't need to get involved in that war. It's a matter of opinion, but we did, and I think very few people believe that the world would have been a better place if that war had not been fought or if it had been lost. That involved enormous sacrifice of materials and blood, in that case. Actual lives were lost. All of us feel at some level an obligation to the next generation. And that obligation was driven home to me when my own research began to show that storms that already kill a lot of people and do a lot of damage could be and probably are getting worse. And in my case, I feel a very strong incentive to try to do something about this. So what's at stake for the younger generation is potentially large, but it's uncertain. Nobody in my profession thinks that the science is settled or that all the questions have been answered. Far from it. Maybe things won't turn out to be so bad, but maybe they will turn out to be terrible. And unfortunately, my science is not at this time, and probably not in the near future, going to be able to pin it down more to that. But if there is even a 10% or a 5% or a 1% chance of something truly catastrophic happening downstream, and we can deal with it now, then we should deal with it now. Now, what are those possible outcomes? Well, let's start with sea level rise. Sea level is going up. Nobody disputes that. It's going up at the moment principally because ocean water expands when it warms, but it's also beginning to go up because of the melting of continental ice sheets, principally in Greenland. If all of Greenland melts, and it has done so in the not so distant geological past, you're talking about 7 meters or about 22 feet of sea level rise. So that really means that major coastal cities, New York, Boston, Miami, certainly, many, many places would be in deep trouble if that happened. But even more imminently than that is the fact that climate change causes profound changes in the hydrological cycle. You basically start to have more rain where it's already wet, and this means that you have a greater incidence of floods. And you start to see less rain where it's already dry, which means you have a greater incidence of droughts. And you might think of floods and droughts as distant to your own experience. Okay, that may be true. But they affect the availability and price of food and water. And we already have times and places like California right now. There are towns in California that basically have run out of water. We take water for granted. But the shortage of food and water in other parts of the world is enormously, potentially politically destabilizing. We can certainly trace past armed conflicts to local climate change that made the availability of food and or water less. And people in our own Defense Department are deeply concerned about the implications of food and water scarcity for our own national security, because they greatly increase the potential for armed conflict and put enormous pressures on emigration and so forth. So there are many, many reasons to be concerned about this. What we're doing to the climate system is not a small perturbation. It's a large one. We're taking the most important long-lived greenhouse gas, a greenhouse gas which over timescales of millions of years naturally regulates our climate, without which we'd be in real trouble. And we're doubling and even tripling it. We cannot do this without incurring risk. Anyone who says that we are not incurring serious risk is either ignorant or lying at this point. That we don't know the precise outcome is inarguable. We don't know the precise outcome. But that uncertainty should warrant more caution, not less caution. We should be leaving our kids a better world. We should not be leaving them a very risky world. And yet there are plenty of adults who ought to know better who are arguing that it's perfectly okay for us to incur risk. It's exactly the opposite attitude of my parents' generation, where they sacrificed themselves so that we didn't have to face fascism, communism, and so forth. It's too bad that my generation doesn't seem to have this attitude today. It seems to have the attitude that, oh, well, it's much more important for us to have as much money as we possibly can, drive our Hummers and so forth, than it is to leave our kids a world which is less risky. I think we need to change our attitude about that.